Hunter Sung Jinoo arrived at the funeral, dressed in a black suit, his presence commanding the attention of reporters who quickly began snapping pictures. The funeral was held to honor the hunters who had lost their lives during the Jeju Island raid, a mission that had gripped the entire nation. This raid had been Sung Jinoo's first official mission since being re-evaluated as an S-rank hunter. It was his public debut, and the world had watched in awe as he defeated the formidable Ant King while his summoned creatures dealt with the seemingly endless hordes of ants. The mission's success had been a massive event, with people pouring onto the internet to discuss every detail. Sung Jinoo's name was on everyone's lips. While many praised his extraordinary abilities, not all the comments were positive. Some criticized him, believing that if he had joined the raid earlier, the death toll might have been lower. Although there were those who supported Sung Jinoo, few could argue against the fact that lives had been lost, and the criticism lingered. Under a somber sky, Sung Jinoo stood before the memorial, his expression solemn as he paid his respects to the brave hunters who had fallen on Jeju Island. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, and the white flowers laid at the memorial spoke silently of sacrifice and courage. Mourners gathered around, sharing in the sorrow and paying their respects. Baek, filled with emotion after losing his friend Byung-gyu, approached Sung Jinoo. Baek had always believed that no single person could end a war alone, but the events of the raid had made him reconsider. Despite the tragedy, he acknowledged that Sung Jinoo had brought an end to the nightmare on Jeju Island. In total, 4,801 hunters had participated in the 5th Jeju Island raid, alongside 727 awakened civilians who were called to fight. The death toll was grim, with 64 awakened beings and 32 civilians losing their lives in battle. However, the final raid had the fewest casualties compared to the previous 4 attempts, marking a small yet significant victory amidst the sorrow. Sung Jinoo sat down with President Go Gun-hee for a conversation. The topic of discussion was Jinoo's plans to form his own guild. As an S-rank hunter, Jinoo didn't need to go through the usual process of obtaining a guildmaster's license. President Go explained that all it would take was a simple phone call to the Hunters Association, and they would handle everything for him. Jinoo considered this information, thinking that it might be a good idea to also look into the benefits that came with being an S-rank hunter. During their conversation, President Go brought up an unusual occurrence on Jeju Island. Soldiers and hunters had been sent to the island to clean up the remains of the ants and collect essence stones. However, something strange had happened. They all lost consciousness while on the island. The hunters involved were A rank or B rank, including members of the Knights Guild. President Go wondered if Jinoo had cast a barrier on the island and possibly forgotten about it. Jinoo was confused by the suggestion and clarified that he had not done anything like that. President Go seemed to believe him, but was still puzzled by the situation. The soldiers and hunters had no memory of what happened before they lost consciousness, leaving the association with no way of determining whether they had been under a magic spell or if something else was at play. Jinoo considered the possibility that it could have been a trap left behind by the ants. Their conversation was interrupted when an employee of the association approached President Go to inform him that a guest had arrived earlier than expected. President Go apologized to Jinoo, explaining that he needed to leave. Jinoo acknowledged the thanks from President Go, assuring him that it was no trouble at all. Sung Jinoo decided it was time to head back, so he made his way to his car. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a voice from behind. Turning around, he saw a man approaching him. The man introduced himself as Adam White, a senior official from the Federal Bureau of Hunters. This surprised Jinoo, as he had never dealt with the Federal Bureau of Hunters before. Adam explained that it had been difficult to track Jinoo down, even mentioning that he had stopped by Jinoo's office. This made Jinoo recall a previous conversation with Jinho, where Jinho had mentioned someone like Adam had even given him a visiting card. Curious, Jinoo asked why Adam wanted to meet with him. Adam revealed that he had some important information to share, information that no other country or institution could provide except for the Bureau. Jinoo wondered why they would share such valuable information with him, and Adam explained that the Bureau benefited from sharing knowledge with special individuals like Jinoo. The recent raid on Jeju Island had left a strong impression on the Bureau's deputy director, who wanted to meet Jinoo in person to discuss matters further. Adam had a car waiting nearby and invited Jinoo to meet the deputy director. Jinoo considered the offer, thinking about the information that Adam claimed to have. As he opened his car door, he expressed his doubts about the reliability of the information. He told Adam that he would think it over and reach out later. However, before Jinoo could leave, Adam mentioned something that caught his attention, a term he had never heard before, an upgrader. Adam explained that an upgrader was an awakened being who could enhance the abilities of another awakened being. This piqued Jinoo's curiosity, prompting him to sit with Adam in his car and drive off to meet the deputy director. Sung Jinoo arrived at his destination with Adam White, who announced their arrival. Inside, they were greeted by Michael Connor, the deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Hunters. Connor introduced himself and quickly got to the point, presenting Jinoo with immigration documents. These documents, which usually take years to process, were offered to Jinoo with the promise of instant American citizenship if he accepted. However, Jinoo was more interested in the information that Adam had mentioned earlier. He asked about the possibility of an awakened being enhancing the abilities of another, specifically an upgrader. Connor confirmed that such a person existed, and with a grin called for her to enter. A middle-aged woman named Norma Selner walked in. Connor introduced her as the only person in the world capable of enhancing an awakened being's abilities. Jinoo immediately sensed that she was a completely different type of awakened being. Miss Selner began to explain her powers, noting the suspicion in Jinoo's eyes. She acknowledged that most people were skeptical at first, but assured him that once they experienced her abilities, they would be convinced. She explained that every awakened being has a limit to their strength, and without a second awakening, they cannot surpass those limits. However, she possessed the power to help awakened beings reach beyond their potential through a process that involved 3 stages, lifting their limitations. Connor confirmed everything she said, adding that Miss Selner required a long period of rest after using her powers, so only 3 or 4 awakened individuals could benefit from her aid each year. Jinoo began to consider whether he would be one of those few people. If what she said was true, her ability was remarkable. When Jinoo asked about the effectiveness of the process, Miss Selner explained that it varied from person to person, but after completing all 3 stages, an individual could experience a 20% to 30% increase in strength. This revelation shocked Jinoo. He now understood why a powerful hunter like Hwang Dong-soo had decided to move to America, despite the backlash he faced from the public. Such an opportunity was too good to pass up for any hunter. Jinoo realized that if a word got out about Miss Selner's powers, it could cause significant problems. Connor acknowledged this concern, explaining that they ensured her safety while also compensating her with a suitable salary. In return, Miss Selner enhanced the abilities of the hunters they selected. The Bureau wanted to offer this incredible gift to Sung Jinoo, recognizing the potential impact of her abilities on someone as powerful as him. Sung Jinoo considered the offer presented to him, thinking about the so-called gift that Michael Connor and Norma Selner were discussing. Connor assured him that once he became a hunter for the Federal Bureau, he would receive top priority and preferential benefits, along with help in securing the best contract with the guild of his choice. Norma Selner reiterated that there was no rush to make a decision. They were simply introducing him to what they could offer. Jinoo was skeptical and questioned the idea of receiving something for nothing. However, Connor and Selner emphasized that this was a complimentary service, a gesture of goodwill. Jinoo remembered Selner's earlier confidence that he would be begging for more once he experienced her abilities. Norma Selner gently took hold of Jinoo's wrist and with a kind smile beckoned him closer. She instructed him to look into her eyes as she began the first step of the process. Connor, observing the interaction, was pleased, thinking that Jinoo had taken the bait. He believed that once the first stage was completed, Jinoo would be eager to continue and might even sign the papers immediately. As Norma gazed into Jinoo's eyes, she suddenly found herself surrounded by darkness. She searched frantically but saw nothing until a shadow emerged. It moved closer, revealing its terrifying presence as it opened its eyes and stared directly at her. Overwhelmed by fear, Norma screamed and fell off her chair, utterly terrified by what she had seen. The 2 agents guarding Norma instantly drew their guns, pointing them at Jinoo in a panic. Michael Connor, alarmed by their actions, quickly intervened, shouting at the agents to lower their weapons. He reminded them of who Jinoo was, warning them that if they had acted this way towards someone like Thomas Andre or Liu Zhigong, they would all be dead. Realizing their mistake, the agents quickly holstered their guns and rushed to help the trembling Norma, whose face had turned pale. Michael bowed deeply to Jinoo, apologizing profusely for the agent's behavior. Jinoo, still trying to make sense of what had just happened, reassured Michael that it was okay. okay. Michael then scolded the agents, making it clear how reckless their actions had been. The agents, thoroughly chastised, could only respond with a fearful acknowledgement, realizing the gravity of their mistake. After the unsettling incident, Michael Connor rushed to Norma Selner's side as she trembled in fear. He noticed that she was covered in sweat and asked her with concern if she was feeling unwell. Her condition was alarming, and Michael quickly decided it would be best to reschedule their meeting with Sung Jinoo. Jinoo, though curious about what had transpired, agreed to leave, and Michael instructed Adam White to show Jinoo the way out. Once Jinoo had left, Michael remained alone with Norma in the room, eager to understand what had just happened. He asked her what had gone wrong, noticing that the situation had clearly shaken her. Norma, still struggling to catch her breath, pressed her hand against her chest and finally managed to speak. She revealed that during the encounter, she had sensed something extraordinary about Jinoo. Norma described Jinoo as a king, a powerful king unlike any she had ever encountered before. Michael's eyes widened in shock at her words. He asked if this meant Jinoo was as strong as a national-level hunter, but Norma, still trembling, explained that this wasn't something she could easily measure. She confessed that she had never experienced anything like it before. While looking at Jinoo, she felt as though something within him was staring back at her. Norma clarified that it wasn't Jinoo himself, but rather an infinite darkness within him. This darkness, vast and terrifying, had gazed into her as she tried to peer into Jinoo's soul. The encounter had left her deeply shaken, and as she continued to tremble in fear, she shared one last critical insight with Michael. There was no limit to Jinoo's powers. At the Hunter Association, Go Gun-hee sat alone, deep in thought. He was troubled by recent events, particularly the loss of Hunter Min Byung-gyu. Though Min Byung-gyu had retired, his noble sacrifice during the raid weighed heavily on Go Gun-hee's heart. He realized that the challenges ahead might bring more sacrifices, and that thought filled him with dread. As he pondered, the phone on his table rang loudly, snapping him out of his thoughts. When he answered, an urgent voice on the other end informed him of a B-rank gate that had appeared in the middle of a road. Gun-hee's eyes widened in surprise. A B-rank gate was not something an average attack squad could handle, and it required immediate attention. As he considered which big guild to contact, he suddenly remembered that Hunter Sung Jinoo had recently opened an office near the area. Meanwhile, traffic was building up on the road where Jinoo was driving. Deep in thought, Jinoo was trying to make sense of what Norma Selner had seen in him. He knew she had been terrified, but he couldn't figure out exactly what she had seen. Jinoo's phone vibrated and he glanced at the caller ID. It was President Go Gun-hee. Curious, Jinoo answered the call. Gun-hee, the chairman of the Hunter Association, spoke with a tone that suggested something urgent. Gun-hee informed Jinoo about a gate that had appeared in the middle of the road, causing severe traffic issues. It was a B-rank gate, and Gun-hee asked if Jinoo could take care of it. Jinoo, somewhat surprised, questioned whether he could do so without proper permission. However, Gun-hee reassured him with a lighthearted remark, reminding Jinoo that as the chairman of the Hunter Association, he could grant that permission. Jinoo couldn't help but smile at Gun-hee's playful tone. With the chairman's blessing, Jinoo stepped out of the van, ready to take on the task. He followed the trail of mana leading to the gate. Reporters had already gathered around the portal, and the police were helping association employees cordon off the area. As Jinoo approached the gate, a female employee blocked his path, demanding to know what he was doing. She quickly recognized him as an S-rank hunter, and her surprise was evident. The crowd soon realized who he was, and excitement spread as they recognized that Sung Jinoo himself was there to handle the gate. The female employee, still trying to enforce the rules, reminded Jinoo that even as an S-rank, he couldn't just enter without proper authorization and enough people. Sensing the situation was becoming complicated, Jinoo made an urgent call to President Go Gun-hee. Handing the phone to the female employee, Jinoo told her to speak to someone she couldn't ignore, the chairman himself. Trembling, the female employee spoke to Gun-hee and quickly agreed to let Jinoo proceed. Jinoo then entered the gate without hesitation, disappearing from sight. The female employee, still frustrated by the situation, muttered to herself, hoping he might trip and hurt himself. However, her thoughts were interrupted by screams from the crowd. The black surface of the gate had suddenly turned blood red. It was a red gate. The sight of it sent shivers down everyone's spine, and the female employee panicked, wondering if her ill wishes had somehow caused this terrifying change. As Jinoo entered the gate, a heavy feeling washed over him. This wasn't an ordinary gate, it was a red gate, a place where the exit would remain sealed until the mission was completed. Jinoo knew that he might have to push himself beyond his limits to get through this. His thoughts drifted back to a recent conversation with his mother, Kyung-hee. She had expressed her hopes for him, acknowledging that his awakening as an S-rank hunter was something beyond their control. She reminded him of his father, who had once been a firefighter before becoming a hunter. Jinoo's mother had fallen in love with his father after seeing him save people, and she understood that Jinoo had inherited that same sense of duty, but she had also warned him not to overdo it, to be careful. Jinoo felt a sense of relief knowing that his mother wasn't against his path as a hunter. Her words echoed in his mind as he prepared for the battle ahead. "This won't be too much for me," he assured himself. The battle began with Jinoo's shadow soldiers clashing against the magic beasts that swarmed the gate. Amidst the chaos, Jinoo stood tall, commanding his army with precision. The shadow soldiers, powerful and relentless, tore through the ranks of the magic beasts, annihilating them one by one. Jinoo knew that a hunter's true enemy wasn't just the monsters. They also had to avoid being hunted themselves. The roles could reverse in an instant, and even the most skilled hunters had to remain vigilant. No matter how many hunts a hunter faced, the hunt would never end. Jinoo understood this all too well, but he had no intention of stopping. With a cold glint in his eyes, he surveyed the battlefield. The first wave of enemies had been crushed, but there were more challenges ahead. Jinoo, determined to finish the job within the day, moves on to the next target. The hunt continued, and Jinoo was ready for whatever came next. The boss of the gate emerged, flanked by his guards, his presence commanding and confident. He looked around, searching for the one responsible for the massacre of his people. With a tone of authority, he spoke, impressed yet enraged. The boss had noticed that the small intruder had managed to come this far, slaughtering his people and even speaking their language. But his confidence quickly turned to confusion as he called out for his forces, expecting them to surround the intruder. He shouted for them to come out, but there was no response. The silence was deafening. What the boss didn't realize was that Jinoo's shadow soldiers had already decimated his troops, eliminating them on their way to the heart of the gate. Jinoo found the situation amusing. Small, now that's funny, he thought as he commanded his shadow soldiers to reveal themselves. One by one, the magic beasts began to fall, ambushed by the shadow soldiers who had been lying in wait. They struck with precision, dropping the beasts effortlessly, like cutting through butter. Jinoo surveyed the battlefield and noted that there was no one left. The boss of the magic beasts was stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Panic set in as he realized that his forces had been wiped out. Desperate, the boss rolled out his palm, calling forth his hidden soldiers from the trees. The trees broke, forming more magic beasts, but before they could even take a step forward, Beru, one of Jinoo's strongest shadow soldiers, sniped off their heads with deadly accuracy. Jinoo, along with his shadow army, marched forward with an overwhelming aura that was impossible to miss. The boss, now paralyzed with fear, could barely utter a word. The realization that he was completely outmatched struck him hard. Jinoo gave the command, and his shadow army sprang into action. Leading the charge this time was Beru, the powerful ant-like shadow. The magic beasts, sensing the imminent threat, rushed forward with ferocity, but they were no match for the shadow soldiers. The battlefield turned into a scene of chaos as Jinoo's forces brutally ripped apart their enemies piece by piece. The clash was intense, with the shadow soldiers showing no mercy. Two centaur beasts, larger and more menacing than the rest, leaped toward Jinoo, their weapons aimed directly at him. However, before they could even get close, Tank, one of Jinoo's most fearsome shadow beasts, intercepted them. With incredible strength, Tank tore the centaurs apart, adding to the mayhem that was already unfolding. The boss of the magic beasts, witnessing the destruction of his forces, screamed in agony, calling out for his fallen children, but his cries went unanswered as Beru charged at him with lightning speed. Beru's sharp claws pierced through the boss, while Igris slashed the boss's arm clean off. The boss dropped to the ground with a heavy thud, fluid spilling from his wounds as he screamed in pain. Tusk used his skill, Hymn of Giants, to increase his size dramatically. Then activating his skill, Inverse Gravity, Tusk slammed the already weakened boss into the ground with overwhelming force. The impact shook the battlefield, and the boss was left lying there, broken and bleeding. Jinoo approached the defeated boss, his presence commanding and cold. He looked down at the magic beast, who was now barely clinging to life, and demanded answers. Jinoo made it clear that the beast's suffering would be lessened if he cooperated, but the boss remained silent, blood continuing to pour from his mouth. Jinoo sighed, realizing that the system might be interfering again, preventing the beast from speaking. "You've got nothing to say, huh?" Jinoo thought to himself, "It must be the system blocking you, but I'll find out the truth sooner or later." Jinoo opened his inventory, and with a focused expression, he took out a key. A key that had come from the cursed random box, obtained after defeating the demon monarch, King Baran, in the demon castle. At the time, the key had held no information, leaving Jinoo puzzled about its purpose. As Jinoo reflected on his recent achievements, he recalled reaching level 100 during the Jeju Island raid. This milestone had unlocked new information about the mysterious key. The system had finally provided details. The required conditions had been fulfilled. The key unlocks the entrance to the Part-1 temple. It can be used at the designated gate. The location of the designated gate will be revealed after the allotted time passes. The name flashed in Jinoo's mind, Part-1 Temple. It struck him with a sense of familiarity, and he quickly pieced together the memories. The double dungeon, the old temple at its end, the stone statues, and the stone slate held by one of them. It all came rushing back to him. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Jinoo realized that the system was calling him back to the place where everything had begun. The dungeon where he had first encountered the terrifying stone statues, the same place that had set him on his path as a hunter, was now beckoning him once more. But this time, it felt different. If everything had been arranged from the very start, if the system had been waiting for him to return, then Jinoo knew he had to answer that call. With determination in his eyes, Jinoo made up his mind. The system had challenged him once again, and he was ready to face whatever awaited him. If that's the part, then wait for me. With a steely resolve in his heart, Jinoo said, "I will be coming soon." Jinho's eyes narrowed as he focused on the computer screen, his determination evident in the sharpness of his gaze. Like a hawk targeting its prey, he scanned the posts and comments with a burning intensity. He was on a mission to protect Jinoo's reputation, and nothing would stop him. Quickly, Jinho took screenshots of the offending content and began reporting them. The rhythm of his typing filled the room until he finally paused, lifting his hands to wipe the sweat from his brow. Just then, Jinoo appeared silently beside him, startling Jinho out of his concentration. Without warning, Jinoo asked if everything was alright, causing Jinho to jump from his seat in surprise. He spun around, recognizing his boss standing there, dressed in his hunting gear. Jinoo inquired if there had been any trouble, but Jinho assured him there wasn't. He then asked why Jinoo was dressed that way, to which Jinoo casually replied that he had just come out of a gate. He explained that they needed money for the guild, and so he had brought back some high-level magical cores. Jinho was impressed, realizing that Jinoo had just cleared a high-ranked gate and secured their financial stability. This meant they wouldn't have to worry about salaries for their future employees. Jinoo seemed puzzled when Jinho mentioned employees, reminding Jinoo that they needed one more member to officially establish the guild. Then Jinho brought up another urgent matter, the name for their guild. Jinoo initially thought it wasn't a serious issue, but Jinho emphasized its importance. He suggested various names, like Sungyu Guild, combining their last names, or Wooho Guild, using the last characters in their names. He even proposed Jinjin Guild, using their middle characters. However, Jinoo casually suggested Solo Play Guild, reflecting the nature of his solo player style. Jinho was momentarily taken aback, wondering if Jinoo was trying to be humorous. Despite his admiration for Jinoo, Jinho couldn't help but think that perhaps humor was one area where his boss wasn't quite as skilled. It reminded him that even someone as extraordinary as Jinoo was still human. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jinho paused, curious about who could be visiting. As he creaked open the door, a voice drifted in, asking if this was Hunter Sung Jinoo's guild office. Jinho confirmed it, but was taken aback when the visitor stepped in. It was Hunter HaeIn. Jinoo was equally surprised to see her. He couldn't fathom why someone like her would be at his office. When he asked, HaeIn simply stated that she wanted to join his guild. Jinoo was confused and sought clarification, unsure of what was happening. He wondered if the president of the Hunters Association had sent her, or if she had been kicked out of her previous guild, but HaeIn denied both. Jinoo then asked her why she would want to join his guild, Solo Play. HaeIn seemed rattled, not expecting that to be the name of the guild. Guild. Jinoo saw no issue with the name, explaining that both he and Jinho had agreed on it. Jinho quickly corrected him, insisting that no such decision had been made, but Jinoo assumed they had reached a consensus. As the situation grew more perplexing, Jinoo tried to calm his thoughts, realizing his judgment was clouded. He carefully observed HaeIn, her pulse, breathing, and expression. Although she tried to remain calm, Jinoo sensed she was hiding something. He wondered why she was so eager to join his guild. Jinoo brought up that it had been 2 years since HaeIn had awakened and assumed she was still under contract with her current guild. HaeIn surprised him by saying she was willing to pay the penalty to break her contract, even without expecting any compensation from Jinoo's guild. Perplexed, Jinoo pressed her further, asking why she wanted to join a guild that had little to offer her. HaeIn hesitated, bowing her head without answering. She couldn't bring herself to explain that from the first time they met, she had been drawn to him, particularly to his scent. She also recalled the overwhelming feelings she experienced during the battle on Jeju Island, where she had been certain she would die. But when she woke up in the helicopter, unable to believe she was still alive, the first name that came to her mind was Jinoo. The president had confirmed it too. Jinoo's presence had brought her comfort in the face of death. Embarrassed, HaeIn found it difficult to admit that she wanted Jinoo by her side in such moments, as it was something deeply personal. Jinoo, meanwhile, reflected on how differently HaeIn had behaved at the funeral, sensing that she had been planning this for a while. Finally, HaeIn gave a simple, prepared response, meeting Jinoo's eyes. She said she wanted a simpler life, as if trying to downplay the true reasons behind her decision. Jinoo considered the situation carefully as he listened to Jinho's thoughts. Jinho reminded him of how much pressure Hunter Cha HaeIn must have faced from the Hunters Guild to stay with them, especially given her young age, only around 22 or 23. Jinoo understood the burden of being an S-rank hunter and the struggles the Hunters Guild had endured during the Jeju Island raid. He empathized with HaeIn's situation, but he also needed to be cautious. To test her resolve, Jinoo decided to introduce an entrance test for his guild. HaeIn was surprised, as this wasn't mentioned in the recruitment notice, but Jinoo smoothly explained that it was a rule and perhaps an oversight on Jinho's part. He then sent Jinho to fetch some drinks and snacks, giving them some time to prepare. As soon as HaeIn heard the word test, she grew serious, her expression becoming more determined. Jinoo was a bit caught off guard, unsure if she was being serious or just stubborn. However, the look in her eyes showed a hidden passion and determination. Jinoo informed her that the test would involve facing one of his summons, specifically his strongest one. HaeIn didn't back down, showing no fear or hesitation. She was ready for the challenge and wanted to proceed immediately. Jinoo suggested they head to the gymnasium of the association to conduct the test. Both of them rose to their feet as if they had planned this moment together. As they prepared to leave, Jinoo realized that the gymnasium was quite far from their current location. He wanted to test if his shadow exchange skill could transport both of them together. Jinoo reassured HaeIn that they didn't need to leave the room in the usual way. They could take a shortcut by sticking close to each other for a moment. HaeIn felt a lump in her throat as Jinoo approached her, his face closer than she had expected. Jinoo activated the shadow exchange skill, and both of them soundlessly sank into their shadows. Just as they vanished, Jinho returned to the room with tea and snacks, only to find an embarrassed-looking high orc shadow soldier in their place. The orc quickly snatched the snacks and began eating them. As Jinoo and HaeIn traveled through the shadows, Jinoo confirmed his theory about the true nature of the shadow exchange skill. It created a gate, allowing them to pass through together, with the shadow on the ground serving as the entry point and the destination determined by the location of one of his soldiers. This ability was remarkable, enabling him to travel great distances in an instant with only a 3-hour cooldown between uses. As they arrived at the gymnasium, the lights turned on automatically, reacting to their mana. The gym was brightly lit, and HaeIn was amazed by the skill she had just experienced. She looked around in wonder before her gaze settled on Jinoo, who was ready to begin the test. Jinoo decided it was time to begin, but HaeIn suddenly remembered she had left her weapon behind. When Jinoo teased her about the pickaxe, she blushed, embarrassed by the memory. Jinoo chuckled, reassuring her that he was only joking. HaeIn considered borrowing a weapon from the storage and walked over to the door, using her hunter's license to access the keycard reader. Jinoo mentioned that hunters could use the reserve weapons from the gymnasiums, although they weren't of the highest quality and were mainly for practice. HaeIn inspected the weapons and selected a sword similar in length to to her usual one. Feeling ready, HaeIn confirmed her choice, but Jinoo was concerned that she might not be comfortable with a weapon that wasn't hers. HaeIn, however, dismissed this, noting that in battles, monsters never fought on their terms anyway. Jinoo agreed with her sentiment, knowing that an ordinary soldier would easily be torn apart in a fight. He called forth a smaller shadow from his own, which moved a few paces away before a knight silently emerged. It was Igris, the best swordsman among Jinoo's shadow soldiers. Jinoo explained the conditions for winning or losing. Victory would come from destroying the summon, while defeat would occur if HaeIn chose to surrender. He realized that calling on his strongest soldier Beru would be too overwhelming for HaeIn, potentially traumatic even, so he settled on Igris for this test. HaeIn nodded in agreement, readying the sword she had borrowed from the equipment room. Jinoo, however, hesitated, recalling her earlier statement that weapons didn't matter. He asked her to turn back for a moment, and when she complied, he took the Demon Monarch's sword from his inventory and handed it to Igris. With everything in place, Jinoo signaled the start, and HaeIn prepared herself for the challenge ahead. Jinoo signaled to HaeIn that everything was ready. As she turned, she noticed Igris holding a sword crackling with blue electricity, a weapon he hadn't been wielding earlier. Without hesitation, Igris made the first move, swinging the Demon Monarch's sword with deadly precision. A bolt of lightning shot straight at HaeIn. She instinctively bent backward, narrowly avoiding the blast with the agility of a cat. The bolt struck the wall behind her, leaving a blackened scorch mark as evidence of its power. Jinoo observed the scene, impressed by her speed, knowing that an ordinary person would have been fatally wounded by even a slight graze from that attack. HaeIn gripped her sword tightly and charged forward, her focus unwavering. Igris, determined to make her surrender as instructed, met her head on. Their blades collided with a fierce clash, sending sparks flying. Meanwhile, President Go Gun-hee was in his office, situated on the highest floor of the main association building. From his vantage point, he could see all the association buildings and the surrounding area as he read through confidential reports, and something outside his window caught his attention. The lights were on in the supposedly empty gym. Confused, Gun-hee buzzed his secretary to check if someone had rented the gym for the day. When informed that there was no booking, Gun-hee asked for the surveillance cameras to be turned on and the feed displayed on his monitor. To his surprise, the screen showed Jinoo and HaeIn in the gym. Gun-hee's initial shock turned into a smile as he wondered if the two hunters were in a relationship. He recalled that when HaeIn had first regained consciousness in the helicopter, the first person she had asked about was Jinoo. The realization made him grin fondly as he watched the scene unfold. Deciding to respect their privacy, Gun-hee asked his secretary to turn off the surveillance cameras in the gym, citing a maintenance check in the records. Once the TV turned off, Gun-hee chuckled to himself as he returned to his reports. However, a slight tremor from the gym caused the walls of his office to ripple. Gun-hee didn't look up, but the smile on his face remained. The thought of youth and the energy it brought warmed his heart as he continued with his work, content with the scene he had just witnessed. Jinoo realized he might have underestimated HaeIn's abilities. Despite giving Igris the powerful Demon Monarch's sword, HaeIn was still too strong for the knight. As soon as Igris was overwhelmed and crashed into the wall, Jinoo called off the match. However, HaeIn wasn't satisfied. She questioned whether Igris was truly the strongest summon Jinoo had and insisted on facing the strongest one now. Jinoo hesitated, concerned that HaeIn might get hurt, but she was determined. She expressed her desire to fight the strongest summon again, no matter the risk. After considering her resolve, Jinoo finally agreed. He summoned Beru, the shadow ant with an intimidating presence. Although shadow soldiers were generally weaker than their living counterparts, Beru was different. He had been created solely as a weapon to kill hunters, making him a formidable opponent. Beru, ever loyal to Jinoo, sought confirmation of his orders. Jinoo commanded him to defeat HaeIn, but emphasized that she must not be harmed. With his mission clear, Beru unleashed a fearsome battle cry that echoed through the gym, so powerful that the light bulbs above shattered, plunging the room into darkness. The sheer force of his roar sent a wave of terror through HaeIn as she witnessed the raw, untamed power radiating from Beru. His blade-like claws, sharp and deadly, extended menacingly from his fingers, ready to strike. However, just as the tension peaked, Jinoo sternly reminded Beru of his command, not to harm her. The warning was enough to make Beru instantly retract his claws, his fierce resolve tempered by his unwavering obedience to his king. HaeIn noticed an opening and seized the moment. However, before she could react, Beru disappeared from her sight and reappeared behind her in an instant. Recognizing the move from a previous encounter, HaeIn steeled herself, refusing to fall for the same trick twice. Despite being momentarily stunned by Beru's incredible speed, her reflexes kicked in and she launched a flurry of attacks. HaeIn's sword struck out dozens of times, but Beru skillfully avoided each blow without even moving from his spot. His movements were precise and efficient, so quick that they left after images in their wake. The overwhelming difference in power between them became glaringly clear. Beru had been given a clear command by Jinah: defeat his opponent without causing her harm. Confident in his abilities, Beru knew this task would be simple. He planned to show HaeIn the vast difference in their strength, making her lose the will to continue fighting. HaeIn, however, was in disbelief. No matter how many strikes she made, Beru dodged them all effortlessly, even at such close range. She couldn't understand how he managed to avoid her attacks without even taking a step back. When she aimed for his neck, he merely leaned back slightly, easily evading the blow. No matter how she varied her attacks, he moved out of harm's way with ease. Confusion and frustration began to set in for HaeIn. Beru wasn't even a real magic beast. He was merely a minion borrowing the power of a dead one. How could he be so powerful? And what kind of strength did Jinah possess to control such a powerful minion with ease? Then he closed the distance between them, and HaeIn was suddenly overwhelmed by the stench of death emanating from him. In that moment, she felt it was over. Beru's wide open mouth filled her vision, and she couldn't help but let out a scream, expecting the worst. But instead of attacking, Beru released a terrifying roar. The sheer force of his magic power pushed HaeIn back, leaving her momentarily stunned. Jinah watched the one-sided fight with a grimace, finding no pleasure in the spectacle. He asked HaeIn if she was satisfied, hoping she would yield, but with determination still burning in her eyes, HaeIn refused to give up. She insisted that she could still fight, despite the overwhelming odds against her. Jinah watched the fight, trying to understand HaeIn's intentions. He hadn't expected her to continue fighting after recognizing the vast difference in strength between herself and Beru. Beru was unlike Jinah's other shadow soldiers. Although intelligent, he was still a killing machine at heart. Even now, Jinah could sense Beru suppressing his overwhelming thirst to kill. Jinah hoped HaeIn wouldn't make a misstep, especially if she was aiming for a weak spot. Suddenly, Beru's instincts flared up. He couldn't tolerate a prey standing up against its predator. Furious, Beru extended his claws and lunged at HaeIn, but she dodged his attack skillfully. They locked eyes and the tension between them was palpable. HaeIn decided to use her most confident move, a skill called Sword Dance. She moved with increasing speed, her blade drawing elegant arcs in the air as if she were dancing. The sound of metal clashing filled the space as Beru blocked her relentless strikes with his claws. Despite his calm exterior, Beru's displeasure was evident. Growing tired of the game, Beru decided to end it. With his bare hand, he grabbed HaeIn's sword as it came toward him and shattered it. Half the blade broke off, but HaeIn's resolve didn't waver. Her eyes blazed with a cold fury as she focused all her magic power on the remaining piece of her sword. She was about to reveal a skill she had never used before, Sword of Light. The blade glowed brightly, and HaeIn saw her chance. Beru, having lowered his guard after breaking her sword, was unprepared for her next move. HaeIn leaped toward him, thrusting her weapon forward. Jinah, watching in astonishment, realized the danger. In that brief moment, Beru's mind reset, erasing Jinah's command to defeat HaeIn without harming her. Instead, an old command from his former queen resurfaced in his mind: annihilate all enemies. Beru now saw HaeIn as an enemy to be destroyed. Beru, claws outstretched, launched himself at HaeIn with lethal intent. She froze in place, unable to react, fear gripping her as she closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Just as Beru's claws were about to reach her, Jinah intervened. He barely made it in time, catching Beru's claws with his bare hands, preventing the attack. Beru trembled as his eyes met Jinah's, and understanding his mistake, Beru leaped back, dropping to the ground and begging for forgiveness. Jinah knew why Beru had acted this way. The soldier's instincts to protect his master had been strong enough to override Jinah's command. For a moment, Jinah glared at Beru before looking to the side, where HaeIn had fallen to the ground. Exhausted from the intense battle, Jinah, concerned by HaeIn's determination, questioned her motives. He couldn't understand why she was pushing herself so hard. The test they were undergoing was was just an entrance exam for a nameless guild. A hunter of HaeIn's caliber didn't need to risk her life over something like this. It simply wasn't worth it. Jinoo asked her why she was going to such lengths, hoping for an answer that made sense. But HaeIn didn't respond. Her silence only deepened Jinoo's confusion. He asked again, wondering if there was something more to her actions. Could it be that she was interested in him? The thought seemed outlandish, but it was the only explanation that came to mind. HaeIn seemed taken aback, almost as if the question had jolted her out of her daze. Jinoo, sensing her surprise, shrugged it off. Perhaps he had been wrong, and there was another reason for her determination. However, after a brief pause, HaeIn collected her thoughts and quietly admitted that Jinoo was right. She did have feelings for him. Her simple admission surprised Jinoo, adding a new layer of understanding to the situation. At the Federal Bureau of Hunters in the United States, the atmosphere in the Hunter Command Center was tense. Director David Brennan wasn't pleased with the recent news. His men had failed to recruit Sung Jinoo, a powerful hunter they had been keen on bringing into their fold. The assistant director entered the office, accompanied by Norma Selner, a specialist with unique abilities. David Brennan, eager to get to the bottom of the situation, immediately asked for an explanation. He wasn't interested in apologies, he needed to know what had happened. Michael explained that according to Norma Selner's observations, Sung Jinoo was not just an ordinary hunter, he was one of the kings. This revelation shocked the director. He asked if this meant that Sung Jinoo was as powerful as a national-level hunter, someone with immense strength and influence. Norma Selner began to elaborate. She explained that all awakened hunters draw their powers from a place known as the other side. The connection between a hunter and this other side is what she could sense. Sometimes the force from the other side was so strong that some hunters appeared to her as streaks of blinding light, which she referred to as kings. However, in Sung Jinoo's case, things were different. Norma shivered as she recalled her experience. When she looked into Jinoo's eyes, she didn't see a connection to the other side. Instead, she saw darkness, an overwhelming, all-consuming darkness. Sung Jinoo didn't borrow his strength from somewhere else. He was the source of his own power. There were no limitations, no connections to channel his abilities. He was the darkness itself, a force beyond anything she had encountered before. The director, deep in thought, asked if this meant Sung Jinoo was an evil person. Norma clarified that she wasn't speaking about good or evil, but rather the nature of his power. Jinoo didn't rely on an external connection for his strength, which meant that the usual limitations didn't apply to him. As the weight of Norma's words settled in, the assistant director, Michael, couldn't help but shiver. The realization struck him hard. There was no limit to Sung Jinoo's powers. Norma nodded in agreement, confirming the terrifying truth. Director Brennan, now understanding the gravity of the situation, thanked Norma Selner for her time. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what they had just learned. Michael watched as Director Brennan abruptly stood up from his desk, clearly with a plan in mind. Curiosity piqued. He asked where the director was headed. Brennan, without missing a beat, instructed Michael to follow him to the basement level 24. Both men walked briskly to the elevator and stepped inside. As the elevator descended, Brennan began to speak. He explained that if they couldn't use Norma Selner's abilities to recruit Sung Jinoo, they would need to find another way. He reminded Michael of the first ever S-rank gate that had opened, an event that no one could forget. Michael nodded, recalling the catastrophic dungeon break that had destroyed the entire West Coast area. In response to that disaster, America had recruited the world's strongest hunters by offering them huge rewards. Out of all those who participated, only 5 had survived the raid, earning them the title of national-level hunters, a rank that came with authority equal to that of a nation. Among the monsters they faced was Kamish, the dragon known as the Inextinguishable Flame. Kamish had single-handedly killed hundreds of top-ranking hunters, leaving a devastating mark on history. As they reached the basement level, Director Brennan asked if Michael could believe there was a silver lining to that tragedy. Michael hesitated, but then realized what the director was implying. Brennan confirmed his suspicion as they entered the last room on the level. Inside, Brennan approached a safe and carefully opened it, revealing a heavily secured runestone inside a tempered glass box. This was the runestone that had come from Kamish's remains. Brennan explained that it had been 8 years since the Kamish raid, and there had yet to be a mage-class national-level hunter. The runestone had been waiting in this cold basement, its rightful owner still unknown. However, Brennan believed that Kamish would once again bestow a valuable gift upon their country. As he looked at the mortal remains of Kamish, Brennan's mind raced with possibilities, hoping that this powerful artifact could be the key to their current predicament. After his shower, Jinoo stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining his reflection. He noticed that since his reawakening, he had grown a few inches taller and had become more fit. Jinoo wondered if he had really changed that much, as he considered himself fairly slim with average looks. He pondered whether the buffs he had gained from the will to survive were responsible for these changes. The ability stated that any damages to the body will be restored, so perhaps that included clearing up his skin as well. Curious about how others perceived him, Jinoo peeked into the living room where his sister, Jinah, was lying on the couch. Grinning, he decided to ask for her opinion on his appearance. Jinah, however, wasn't impressed and playfully teased him, saying he just looked like a bum in her eyes. Jinoo responded by pinching her cheek, which led to her usual kick at his shin, though she only ended up hurting herself. Amused by their banter, Jinoo reminded Jinah of his strength and jokingly questioned how she managed to get into school with such a bird brain. Jinah proudly declared that she was at the top of her class, though Jinoo pointed out it was only for her mock exams. The conversation shifted when Jinoo mentioned his plans to form a new guild. Jinah, intrigued, asked about the name he had in mind. Jinoo suggested Solo Play Guild, but Jinah quickly pointed out that it didn't make sense since he used his abilities to summon shadow soldiers, meaning he wasn't truly a solo player. After considering her brother's idea, Jinah suggested the name Ahjin Guild. She explained that the characters Ah meant I and Jin meant to go forward. Jinoo found the name clever, especially when Jinah revealed that she chose it because it was her name spelled backward. Jinoo agreed that Ahjin was not too bad of a name for his new guild. That night, HaeIn lay under her blanket, feeling overwhelmed with embarrassment. The memory of her earlier conversation played over and over in her mind. She couldn't believe she had said, "I think so." It was practically a confession, and the thought made her cringe. As she burrowed deeper into her blanket, she couldn't help but wonder about Jinoo's response to her words. Jinoo had questioned whether there wasn't a better way to handle the situation than joining the guild. At the time, HaeIn had used the excuse of needing to think it over as a way to escape the conversation, but now, every time she reflected on that moment, her mind went blank and her face flushed with embarrassment. She told herself that it was natural to be interested in Jinoo since he had saved her life, but she knew deep down that her feelings were more complicated. Her thoughts drifted to Min Byung-yu, the healer whose abilities had actually saved her. Suddenly, a faint memory surfaced, a voice she had almost forgotten. HaeIn immersed herself deeply in her thoughts, desperately trying to latch onto the fleeting memory. It was recent, yet it felt so distant, like a dream that slips away just as you wake up. The memory tugged at her mind, pulling her out of the darkness. A voice echoed faintly, speaking about Jinoo, urging her to remember. Slowly, the memory began to take shape, becoming clearer. It was Byung-yu's shadow, tinged with an unusual worry that was unlike him, his eyes filled with concern as he spoke to her. He had told her to warn Jinoo, to tell him to be careful of the power he possessed. The realization sent a chill down HaeIn's spine as she finally remembered the encounter with Hunter Min Byung-yu. At the Knights Guild, the atmosphere was tense as Yoon-tae brought important news to Jong-soo. A new gate had appeared the previous day, and Yoon-tae informed him that it would be difficult for the guild to obtain a raid permit due to the gate's high rank. While it wasn't an S-rank gate, it was close enough to cause concern. Jong-soo acknowledged the danger, knowing that the guild could face serious risks if they weren't careful during the raid. Yoon-tae explained that if the gate were S-rank, it would be best to give up on it altogether. The Knights Guild didn't have the manpower to form a proper assault squad for such a high-level gate. However, as one of the 5 major guilds in the country, they couldn't afford to fail without damaging their reputation. Jong-soo was frustrated, understanding that most people underestimated the difficulty of A-rank gates, thinking they were all the same. Yoon-tae mentioned that if they passed on this gate, the famed guild would likely seize the opportunity, which made Jong-soo's eye twitch in irritation. The idea of handing over a gate that had appeared so close to their own territory was infuriating to him. He knew that while their A-rank hunters were strong, comparable to those in other major guilds, the lack of any S-rank hunters was what held them back. As they discussed their options, another hunter, Young Yerim, an A-rank healer, joined the conversation. She suggested forming an alliance with another guild, but Jong-soo was skeptical. He doubted any guild would agree to help, knowing that the Knights Guild only sought assistance because they didn't believe they could clear the gate on their own. Young Yerim then proposed bringing in an individual hunter instead of forming a guild alliance. Jongsu was initially dismissive, questioning how a single hunter could make a difference in such a high-level raid. However, when she mentioned Sung Jinwoo, Jongsu reconsidered. He realized that joining forces with Hunter Sung Jinwoo might not only improve their chances of safely clearing the gate, but also enhance their public image. Yuntae mentioned that Jinwoo had recently cleared an A-rank gate on a highway, but had otherwise kept a low profile. Jongsu decided that contacting Jinwoo directly was necessary, and instead of handling it over the phone, he resolved to visit Jinwoo in person to discuss this crucial matter. The next day, Jinwoo went to the office with a decision about the new guild name. He proposed the name Ahjin Guild. Jinho was thrilled with the suggestion, feeling relieved that it wasn't something like Solo Play Guild. With the name settled, Jinwoo and Jinho knew they only needed to recruit one last founding member to complete the team. Jinho then asked about Hunter HaeIn, curious about why Jinwoo hadn't chosen her. Jinwoo explained that she wasn't the right fit for their guild, leaving Jinho puzzled. HaeIn was an S-rank hunter, young, with an impressive record, and even beautiful, qualities that seemed perfect for their guild. But Jinwoo had something different in mind. He was looking for someone with a hunter's license, who had no interest in joining a guild, but was still trustworthy. As they were discussing potential candidates, there was a knock at the door. Jinwoo wondered if it might be Hunter Cha again, but when he opened the door, he was met with three unfamiliar faces. Park Jong-soo, the guild master of the Knights Guild, along with Yuntae and Young Yerim. Jong-soo introduced himself and then showed Jinwoo a video of a gigantic gate that had appeared in Busan City. The gate was massive, emitting an overwhelming amount of mana, which matched its size, although it had not been officially classified as S-rank by the association. This was the largest gate ever to appear in Busan, and the situation was urgent. As Jinwoo watched the video, he thought about Busan and briefly considered whether he should visit Ju-hee and have her treat him to some sashimi while he was there. As the conversation continued, Young Yerim wondered if Jinwoo might give her an autograph if she asked. However, Park Jong-soo quickly shifted the discussion to a more pressing matter. He informed Jinwoo that the Hunters Association was refusing to grant them a raid permit for the massive gate because there were no S-rank hunters in the Knights Guild. The association believed the raid would be too risky under those circumstances, but there was a possibility they might get the permit if Jinwoo agreed to join their assault team. To sweeten the deal, Jong-soo offered Jinwoo 20% of the profits, a generous share compared to the usual 10% that S-rank hunters typically received. Jinwoo, however, had a different idea in mind. He proposed a 50-50 split, which took Jong-soo by surprise. Jinwoo explained that he would join them only if they treated him as a guild rather than an individual hunter. He also mentioned that he was in the process of founding his own guild called Ahjin. Sweat trickled down Jong-soo's face as he tried to negotiate, offering a 40-60 split instead. But Jinwoo wasn't interested in haggling. Jong-soo, realizing that Jinwoo was far from a pushover despite his young appearance, agreed to the 50-50 terms. However, he added one condition: Jinwoo would need to defeat the dungeon boss. Jinwoo readily agreed. Jong-soo then mentioned that since it had been a while since the gate was discovered, they would need to raid it the next day at the latest. He offered to give Jinwoo a ride to Busan, but Jinwoo declined, explaining that he had plans for the day and would join them tomorrow instead. He assured them that he wouldn't be late. As they were wrapping up the meeting, Yuntae noticed something odd, thinking he saw Jinwoo's shadow move. Jong-soo brushed it off, wondering if Yuntae was drunk. Just as the meeting was about to end on a good note, Jinwoo's phone began vibrating on the table. Checking the caller ID, he saw a number he didn't recognize. Excusing himself, Jinwoo stepped outside the office to take the call. To his surprise, the familiar voice of his mother, Kyung-hee, greeted him. She had just bought a cell phone and called because she wanted to hear his voice. Jinwoo, happy to hear from her, suggested they have dinner together that night, as it had been a while since they last spent time together. Kyung-hee agreed, and Jinwoo looked forward to the evening with his mother. The next day at Gwangali Beach in Busan, all the elite hunters of the Knights Guild gathered at the meeting place. There was a sense of excitement in the air as they anticipated the upcoming raid. However, the guildmaster Jong-soo was filled with nervousness. He anxiously awaited Jinwoo's arrival, regretting not insisting that Jinwoo come with them the day before. The time was ticking down, with only 5 minutes left before they needed to start the raid. Meanwhile, Jinwoo stepped out of his apartment building, dressed casually in comfortable clothes and sneakers. He glanced up at the sky, noticing gray clouds gathering, briefly wondering if his sister Jinah had taken an umbrella with her. But that thought quickly passed as he focused on the task ahead. Jinwoo knew it was time to move. He activated Shadow Exchange, seamlessly swapping places with his Shadow Soldier to reach the meeting point instantly. At Guangali Beach, a large crowd had gathered, their eyes fixated on the enormous gate that had appeared, despite the gloomy clouds hanging overhead. Among the onlookers was Jinah, who observed the scene intently. The gate was even more imposing up close, its size daunting. Jinah took note of the various teams assembled for the raid. The hauling team was stationed on one side, while the mining team was on the opposite end. The assault team, consisting of 13 A-rank hunters and 20 B-rank hunters, stood ready. Jinah couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer number of A-rank hunters present. It was a testament to the strength of the Knights Guild, known for having the highest number of A-rank hunters under their command. As Jinah emerged from his thoughts, he found himself surrounded by the other hunters. They were eager and curious, their questions coming at him in rapid succession. They marveled at his abilities, especially after witnessing his performance during the Jeju Island raid. The sheer number of shadow soldiers he could summon left them in awe. Sensing Jinah's unease, Yerim, the healer of the Knights Guild's elite assault team, stepped in to help. She introduced herself to Jinah, expressing her hope that they could work well together, given their roles in the raid. Yerim's intervention was a relief for Jinah, providing a brief respite from the barrage of questions. Jongsu Park, the guild master, was thrilled to see Jinah and greeted him enthusiastically. However, Jinah was surprised to learn that Jongsu had not yet informed the other hunters about the leadership arrangement for the raid. Jongsu quickly addressed the group, announcing that he, as the guild master, would be leading the raid. This news was met with some disappointment from the other hunters, who had hoped that Jinah would take charge. Despite the grumbling, Jongsu explained that Jinah would be responsible for protecting the backline, ensuring everyone's safety. Some hunters questioned whether they needed protection, feeling confident in their abilities. Jongsu, however, took their remarks in stride, acknowledging their confidence and urging everyone to get started. With the preparations complete, Jongsu signaled the beginning of the raid and the group moved forward, ready to face the challenges that awaited them within the gate. At Jinah's high school, 3 male students were grumbling as they were sent on an errand by their art teacher. They felt annoyed and unfairly burdened with tasks that weren't theirs. Despite their complaints, they made their way to the second art classroom, which had been turned into a storage space. As they unlocked the door, a thick cloud of dust greeted them, a sign that the room hadn't been used in a long time. The room was cluttered with old art supplies, abandoned drawings, and statues used for sketching. As they discussed how many statues they needed to carry back, one of the students noticed something unusual in the far corner of the room. The others joined him, curious about what had caught his attention. There on the wall was a large blue hole, a gate about the size of a person. The biggest of the 3, trying to appear unbothered, inspected the gate. He assured the others that it was no big deal, believing that only hunters could pass through and nothing could come out from the gate, which he assumed was safe. He placed his hand on its surface, confident that nothing could happen. However, at that very moment, a crack appeared on the surface of the gate, and a hand shot out, grabbing the student's head. He struggled, but the hand's grip was unbreakable. In a horrifying instant, a loud crack echoed through the room, and blood splattered everywhere as the student's head was crushed. The 2 remaining students screamed in terror as they were splattered with their friend's blood. The black surface of the gate shattered like glass, and magic beasts began pouring out into the world, bringing with them a wave of destruction. Orcs were natural-born predators, excelling in tracking and hunting weaker prey. Though their intelligence was lower than that of humans, their instincts for hunting were unmatched. Now that the barrier between their dungeon and the human world had disappeared, the orcs began to spill out into the open. 2 of these monsters, filled with excitement at the scent of flesh and blood, had managed to suppress their natural instincts for the past week. They had been tasked with scouting and had remained hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment. Their keen senses soon alerted them to the presence of prey nearby. The first orc sensed that the structure they were in was filled with potential victims. There were multiple floors above them, each one teeming with prey. The leader orc, driven by the thrill of the hunt, decided it was time to begin. He commanded his companion to summon their brothers, planning to start a full-scale assault once they had eliminated all the humans in the building and fortified their position. As the leader orc walks through the corridor, he noticed 2 students in the distance, engaged in a casual conversation. Without hesitation, the orc charged at them, his axe held high. The students, caught completely off guard, stood frozen in disbelief as the predator closed in on them. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching!